Another day, another dollar as I holler to the world. I love the way I'm living, love the Gucci, love the girls, love the parties and the clubs, love the models and hot tubs, love the German engineering set on deep dish dubs. Another tour around the world, entertaining the fans. I love walking through the airport, taking pictures, shaking hands. Every day for me's an oyster, crack it open, find a pearl. I love the way I live is what I holler to the world.
Welcome to Marking Out. I am Dwayne Swayze, joined by my close friend, the Ronin of professional wrestling. So, a former United States champion, tag champion, the inaugural IWGP Intercontinental Champion, and someone who has redefined the game with both his in-ring skills and unmatched mic work. A lot of you guys know him as the co-founder of the Hurt Business, one of the most dominant factions in WWE history, and he's currently shaking things up in AEW with the Hurt Syndicate. Ladies and gentlemen, MVP.
And I want to welcome you for joining me on our very first episode of Marking Out with MVP and Dwayne Swayze. And just to give those of you who are joining us for the first time, well, I guess everybody is, but I mean, in terms of being a fan of mine, if you know me, then you know Dwayne Swayze. We've done a lot of music together. We performed together quite a bit. And the premises for this show came about because we'd be killing time in the studio or hanging out, sipping on some bourbon. And he'd always be like, hey, Pete, let me ask you about that. Or, hey, what happens if he's always got those questions? So if your friend was a professional wrestler and you could ask any questions that you wanted to ask, what would those questions be? So Dwayne, every week we'll put together a list of questions and I'll pick a few to answer out. And we'll do that while sipping some bourbon or scotch and just letting you sit at the table with us as we talk about something that we both love dearly, professional wrestling. This week, we've decided to go in on the Devil's River Agave Bourbon.
Yes.
And I got to tell you, I've had this before. I really like the flavor of it. We're not getting paid for this, but full disclosure, Dave Batista is a partial owner and a very good friend of mine. So shout out to the animal. A-list movie star.
Yes.
Big time. And I'm going to pour this as you hit me with a question.
So, first track we ever did together, Holler to the World. You would come into the studio, from being on the road for days on end, and you always have to immediately leave. So we were trying to get these sessions scheduled. And I remember specifically, we were doing the Holler to the World video. You had told Mikhail, the director of that video, that we only had like 12 hours and we shot at his house.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in the background, I was like, what's going on? You're like, you had a flight to Tokyo in the morning. And we were going to be able to shoot the second scene like 2 weeks later or something like that.
No, as I recall, if we didn't get both scenes in those 2 days, we'd have to split it up over 2 weeks because when we shot the one in the car on day one, and then at my house was day two.
Yes, day two.
Right.
Okay.
Because once we wrapped and everything was done, I literally went to the airport and got on a flight to Tokyo to go do my tour at New Japan. So, yeah.
So that leads me to the first question. So I wanted to ask you, how do travel schedules work? And it's a two-parter. How do travel schedules work? And how many days per year do wrestlers typically work? And how does that affect, your personal lives?
Okay, it's a two-part question, but that question actually has many answers. So through the years of professional wrestling, the schedule has changed and has become a lot less arduous because it used to be that wrestlers made their money off of the live gates. You didn't make money at TV. As a matter of fact, back in the day, for like the territories, a lot of wrestlers and a lot of promotions didn't even pay you for TV. You got no money for TV. You showed up and you shot TV because TV was the advertisement for the live shows. So, they'd say, you come to town, you do your promos, you have your live television, or actually recorded match, and then it would be promoted to all the towns that, these guys would be in this town, that town, and then ticket sales in the gate would dictate how much you got paid.
Okay.
As the model changed through the years, now everything is about streaming and about content. So as I understand it, the WWE actually started scaling back their live events.
All the live events.
Yeah, because they were losing money.
Okay.
Or just breaking it. They weren't profitable. But now with these huge streaming rights deals, it's no longer about the live gate receipts.
And don't lose your train of thought. But I want to ask you, if you remove the live gate aspect, isn't that going to hurt the wrestlers ultimately, their ability to get familiar with one another?
Very good question. And that's something that I remember learning early on in my career when I was watching these pay-per-views and watching, in particular, I remember watching Kurt Angle and Edge have this unbelievable match. It blew me away. There were like multiple false finishes, and I bid on every one. And one of the OGs that was around me at the time said, "You thought that was their first time wrestling?" I said, "No, man. Like, they're on live events, working 3 or 4 nights a week before you get to see them on television or on a pay-per-view." And I would say yes, tremendously, because you can't replace the reps that come with working in front of a live audience. And if you're only working television once a week and a pay-per-view once every month or two, then that definitely cuts into your ability to perfect your craft. And as you said, to get familiar with the person you're working with, developing that rhythm and understanding their idiosyncrasies or whatever, which is all very important to the chemistry of a match. But during my time with WWE, I remember my busiest year. I was on the road 270 something days, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, many of those days I came home, literally dropped off dirty clothes, picked up clean clothes, and I was right back out. And we were doing live events 3, 4 nights a week plus television. We do international tours. I mean, I remember one tour in particular, which was just grueling. We did 10 cities in 10 days. And it was a flight every day. Like sometimes in Europe, you take the tour bus and it's not so bad. But having to finish a late night into an early morning to catch a flight to fly to the next place. Then, if I recall correctly, like some of those tours, we get back to the States and go right to a pay-per-view, right to TV, and then go home. And you'd be on the road for, a couple weeks at a time. And as I said, back in the day, the territory days, guys would be on the road for weeks without a day off. And they'd be driving hundreds and hundreds of miles. And if you're a fan of Jim Cornette, he's a polarizing figure. Some people love him, some people hate him. But if you're a fan of wrestling history, sometimes he goes on certain of his episodes, he kept meticulous notes of his travels with the Midnight Express. And he would tell you his schedule for the month of February and, the Mid-South. And they drove 500 miles here, and then they drove 400 miles there, and they might get 1 week off a week. Nowadays, though, as I said, things have changed quite a bit. And now it's just about streaming. So like with AEW, we do Dynamite and Collision. But most people aren't on both shows. Some are. So then you're doing 1 or 2 shows a week, throwing a pay-per-view. If you're on both shows, then you're doing 8 shows a month. If there's a pay-per-view, you're doing 9. One of the things about AEW is that a lot of the talent, myself included, are allowed to take independent bookings. So if I take an independent booking, I fly out Tuesday, I do TV Wednesday, I'm home Thursday, I'm flying back out Friday to do my booking on Saturday or Sunday or both, depending. And then I'm back on Monday, only to fly back out Tuesday. So at this stage of my career, I'm fortunate that I can be as busy as I want to be. If I just want to work TVs and work 1 day a week, then I can do that. If I want to pick up some more bookings, then I can do that as well. But for younger talent, I think that they need all the matches they can get. WWE schedule has lightened up quite a bit from when I was there. And, they have television. They still do some live events, but not nearly as many as they used to. Their live event business model has changed. And AEW doesn't do any live events. So the schedule used to be torturous. And now, especially compared from just the time from when I started till now, it's actually pretty easy by comparison. And you need that because you asked the other thing is how does it affect home lives?
Right. I could imagine the divorce rate would have to be through the roof.
It's pretty demanding. And I know lots of guys that, they had a lot of issues at home. But I think, it's difficult because you got to figure you're missing a lot of birthdays. You're missing a lot of wedding anniversaries. You're missing, all very important times in your family's life. But at the same time, as I remember Cody Rhodes saying when Dusty Rhodes was inducted into the Hall of Fame, talking about Dad not being there, but he said he always saw Dad was there, the house they lived in. And I think he mentioned something about the stereo system in his sister's car, his new truck, or,
Right.
Dad's not home, but the home that you live in, the clothes, the food on the table,
Daddy's everywhere.
Daddy's everywhere, So and I guess it, comes down to the strength of the relationship with your partner and, what you can and are willing to endure. But it was extremely demanding. Fortunately, the evolution of the business into what it is now, it's not nearly as demanding as it used to be. And you spend now most of your time at home and not on the road.
So we all see you, from social media. We see you traveling with Shelton a lot.
Yeah.
Who were some of your travel partners for over the years?
Oh, man. Well,
And sorry to interrupt you. And how do y'all break up this 400-mile traveling business like in the car? Because I would not like that at all.
Well, the WWE had a rule. If it was over 300 miles, you got a flight. But they would try you sometimes. It would be like 315 miles. I'd be like, nah, I want my flight. Yeah, nah, you ain't doing me no favors. I'm not doing you any. But if you had a good, because some guys would share expenses. So you'd have a bunch of guys riding together that got along. Everybody would chip in for gas. Everybody would chip in for the rental car. Because...
Y'all are paying for that?
Oh, yeah. All right, so the way it was when I was in WWE would fly you out to the starting point. And then in between the live events to television, you were responsible for your own hotels and your own rental cars. So if you had a few guys that travel together, then you would split up the expenses for the rental car, fuel, and, a lot of guys starting out will, with the term they used to use is heal a room. Guys would split a room to save money. But that gets old quick. You start making money, like, man, give me my own room. I shared a room with my little brother. I'm not sharing a room with anybody now. But those expenses are your own. Your food, your gym, all of that is on you. Usually, you find a few guys that you like, that you're cool with. And, there's music on the road, telling stories, laughing and joking. And, that's kind of how you break up the monotony of the road. Back in the day, again, things changed, but back in the day, that's where young guys would learn on the car rides. You would listen to the vets talk, and they would talk to you and tell you things. And here's an interesting tidbit to show how much things have changed. And I think this is a good segue for us to do a toast. Here's to the inaugural episode of Marking Out. Man, that's good.
Delicious.
That's cool, man. I was just thinking about Chavo Classic, Chavo Guerrero Sr. He told me once, and I've had a couple of OGs confirm that this was true. Back before it was illegal to drink and drive, the guys would get beer for the car trip, and they would measure how far it was from one town to the next by how much beer they needed. So somebody, hey, Dwayne, how far is it to Bossier City? Oh, it's about a case of beer, Or, how far is it? How far is it to Beaumont? Oh, that's just a 6-pack, man, Different time, different place,
Dangerous.
Yeah, very dangerous. But at this point, it's changed now. And now, like, for example, AEW, they fly us in, and Tony Khan, I wonder, I haven't even asked him, but this might come from, his ownership of the Jaguars and Fulham, and, but we have a team hotel. So they cover our hotels. They fly us in, they put us up at a hotel, they provide transportation from the hotel to the venue and back. Some people, depending on their contracts, have their own car service, but there's a team bus that's afforded. So now it's a piece of cake, really, compared to how it used to be. I think WWE has the same model where they fly you in, and then you're responsible for your car, your hotel. I don't know how much things have changed there since I left, but they make it really, really easy. And like with WWE, when they did the overseas tours, All you had to do is get on the bus every day. Just show up. Just show up, get on the bus. They're going to get you to the arena, to the hotel. So it was really easy. And if you weren't making it to the bus or you were late or whatever, which happens sometimes, a little too much of the sauce, it would happen. But if you're a professional, you make it. And it's really nowhere near as demanding as it once was.
How much of a match is scripted versus called in the ring? And how does that change depending on the experience level?
Now, it's funny because that question is actually, in today's world of wrestling, almost controversial. So traditionally, especially like the OG guys, those, matches from yesteryear, most of it was called in the ring. Because remember, historically, you had heels and baby faces, good guys and bad guys. And most buildings, they weren't allowed to be in the same locker room. And you'd have a referee that would travel back and forth between the two locker rooms to say who's up, who's down, who's going over, who's winning and losing. Maybe they might send over, hey, look, we might want to do this, let him know that, so that information of what would happen in the match would get transferred from one locker room to the other by a referee a lot of times. Sometimes it was just the referee would come with the finish, and then you got to go out there and call your match. As time has moved on, there became an element of guys talking out a lot more of their matches before they went into the ring. And I think part of that came with television time and production values, because you've got a producer who sits in the TV truck, and now they have to be aware of what camera angles are taking place and where to get the best shot of this, whatever's happening. So the producers or agents or coaches, depending on what, where you work and what you're calling them these days, you always have a producer, or at AEW, we call them coaches, assigned to your match. Used to be agent. And that person will come and tell you how much time you've got, what the story is of the match, what they're looking for, and what the finish is. So
That's their only input. Time.
Primarily.
Okay.
Now, again, this is where we come into experience level. If you're a less experienced guy, then the producer or coach might be a bit more hands-on in terms of suggesting how to go about doing things. Or, you put your match together, and a less experienced wrestler will literally lay everything out from A to Z. And then I'll punch you 3 times, and then you block. And I did it too when I was first starting out. I remember I'd have 20-minute matches memorized, and then I'll drop down, or you leapfrog, and you'd have the whole match memorized.
Do you remember your first match and who called it?
My very first match was a flea market match at Opelika Hialeah Flea Market. And it wasn't really as much of a match as it was like a quick exhibition. So me and the guy talked about it like for 3 or 4 minutes beforehand. And I remember I didn't have wrestling gear yet. And my wrestling teacher, oh man, shout out to Soul Man Alex G. He didn't want us to do that that flea market show. And the guy who was producing it was a well-known local shyster, and he putting it on. And he said, if y'all go work that show, don't come back here.
Oh.
But we were young and eager. We wanted to go work. And he finally relented. He said, okay, go ahead, And it was awful. It was terrible. Nobody on that show was ready to be on a show. But, we all, no, we're ready. I didn't even have gear yet. And I went out there, talking my, cutting the early promo, talking trash, whoever wants to get at me. And somebody came, and I had on some dress pants and a dress shirt. And I remember I gave him a suplex and split my pants. And it was awful. So it was one of those things where we learned in real time that your teacher knows what they're talking about.
And were you Antonio Banks?
At that time, yes, I was Antonio Banks. No, Antonio Banks hadn't been born yet. I was actually, at that point, my very first character, high-profile Tony Style.
Nice.
High-profile Tony Style, yeah. Shout out to high-profile Tony Style. Antonio Banks was born later.
Okay.
because I had ended up being Dave Johnson was a real good friend and mentor. He was part of the Black Hearts, and he had done time. So he started training at the school I was training at because the original school we were training at, Duke the Dumpster Drozie's Wrestling School, had shut its doors. So Rusty Brooks had a wrestling academy. We started training there. And one day afterwards, we went to go to Denny's to grab a bite to eat. And Dave Johnson made a joke that you would only laugh at if you had done time.
Oh,
And we didn't know each other yet. We just kind of, and he made a joke and I started laughing. He goes, I knew it. Where'd you do time? You know? And at that point, he kind of took me under his wing because he said wrestling saved his life when he got out of prison. And I can say it did the same for me, you know? And Dave was one of those guys that would mock the kids in the back. Oh, you guys still practicing your match, huh? You know, guys spending 3 hours to talk over a 10-minute match. You know, but Dave was a guy that when I started working with him, I mean, I was fortunate in South Florida. There were so many guys that we would joke around. It's not even a joke. We would say that we were the bastard children of the Malenkos because a lot of the guys in South Florida were trained by the Malenkos, and they trained people who ended up training people. So we were all in the Malenko lineage of training. And Dave was trained by the Malenkos, so he was very serious and, you know, had a very hardcore attitude about how things went. And he would call our matches all the time. And I would just listen, do what he said to do, and we'd have great matches. And I remember as I started learning and getting into my own groove, you know, when I had to work with some of the older veterans, you know, I'd be salty, like, oh man, this guy's lazy. He don't want to do nothing. He don't want to do no cool spots, you know.
right.
And it, you know, it took some time and veteranship of my own to learn and understand, like, to you, this is a huge show. Man. All 150 people out there. This is a big deal. To me, man, it's Saturday afternoon, man. I'm trying to get home. It's a different approach to it. So back then, I remember going to IPW in Tampa, and you know, me and guys like Lex Lovett comes to mind, Steve Madison. You know, we were really influenced by at the time. There used to be these things called VHS tapes.
What? Blockbuster?
Right. Before DVDs, before YouTube, when you could just punch up whatever match you wanted to see, we used to get VHS tapes, and we were fascinated with the wrestling that was coming out of Japan. And, you know, the King's Road, and Misawa and Kawada, and, you know, watching one of my guys, Chono. And so we were really trying to emulate some of this Japanese wrestling that we saw. But at that time, we would really spend a lot of time putting together this match, and it would be every spot was laid out. The problem with that is, and Soul Man Alex G, Dave Johnson, all those old school guys, they would say, y'all got to learn to work. You can't have all this stuff memorized and literally choreographed, because once you get to a certain level, when you're on live television with no safety net, things change. And it's happened to me countless times, and it's happened to any professional that's been on live television. There have been a number of times where they've said, hey, MVP, you got 12 minutes. Okay, cool. I go out there with whoever I'm working with, and you lock up, you start working, and the referee has the IFB earpiece, and they say, you guys lost 4 minutes.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
So we're 3 minutes into what we thought was 12 minutes. We lost 4. Oh, man. Okay. We got to start working on going home, going to the finish. And if you got a 12-minute match memorized and you don't know how to work, how to call something on the fly, then you're in big trouble. If you can't say, okay, well, let's go to this, you know, or sometimes it's the other way. You pick up time. You have, oh, yeah, you go out there thinking you got 7 minutes, and they go, hey, man, you guys picked up 5 minutes.
Wow.
Well, if you've only got 7 minutes memorized, you better come up with 5 more minutes, you know?
What about the crowd interaction? If they're cheering or booing, don't things need to change to kind of play into what the story is?
Well, that's the beauty of knowing how to work. Still today, I see a lot of young guys will have a 20-minute match laid out step for step. But I've always, and I was brought up this way, where the crowd doesn't dictate your match. You dictate to the crowd.
Okay. All right.
But sometimes you're out there and you're doing a technical style match, and the people are sitting there on their hands. They don't care about a technical match. And then somebody chops somebody, and the crowd comes and like, well, okay, we know what we're doing now.
Red chest. Let's keep it moving.
Yeah. So on experience level, Undertaker told Mr. Kennedy one time, Kennedy was so nervous about working with Taker, and he went to Taker and said, Taker, when you're ready to talk about what you'd like to do tonight, and Taker said, just listen to what I say, kid, and when I drop you on your head, it's all over. And then walked away. He says, listen, do what I tell you to do, we'll be fine, But then you get to a point, and I remember in my career where the veteran and the history of pro wrestling, when you're a veteran and you ask a younger guy, what do you want to do tonight? The correct answer is whatever you want to do. Not, I got this real cool 450 splash that I do. That's the wrong answer. And I guarantee you, depending on who you're working with, you will never do that 450 splash. You know what, kid? That's a great idea for next week. But right now, we're going to do... but you get to a point where finally they'll say, what do you want to do tonight? And they're asking you legitimately for your input, and then you get to a point where, oh, wow, like I can actually, and then that's kind of like an honor as you grow and you gain respect from your peers. And ideally, like I said, because of production, you have to have, at the bare minimum, an outline of what you're doing. Because if you got a big spot where you're going through a table, the production truck needs to know that. Right. If you've got something happening, you want the cameras to be in the right places at the right time, and there's somebody back there, your coach or agent, producer, and they've got the general outline of the match so they can tell the truck, okay, they're getting ready to do that big spot here. So the truck can tell, okay, get camera 3, get camera 2, But I know that most of the more experienced top guys will talk about certain things that they want to do, but they usually work off of an outline. We'll fill in the gaps in between, but we'll start here. Maybe this is a heat spot, and then we know what the finish is. The finish isn't going to change unless something goes drastically wrong. And sometimes that happens. But usually, you fill in the gaps in between. I know, learning from Booker T and Chris Benoit, these were some of the guys that taught me to work from an outline. We'll have a heat spot, we'll have a finish, and then if there's some very specific things that we know we want to get in somewhere, we will get that in. Famously, within the boys, there are moments where you learn about things happening and you adjusting. For example, I was working with Benoit, and this was early in my career where I'm really learning a lot. And we had a heat spot set up. And I was in the corner, and Benoit came and charged me. And he shot me into the corner and said, put up a boot. So I took the turnbuckle, and I was there. And as he charged in, he came in with so much speed and force that when I put my boot up, he ate the boot, but his momentum carried him underneath me, under the bottom turnbuckle.
Goodness.
So he took the boot and still went, psh, and you could hear the whole arena. It was a house show, so I'd say there was, 7,000, 8,000 people, and you could just hear collectively, ooh. And I was like, oh, damn.
Yeah.
So I kind of staggered out of the corner, and Benoit was still down selling, and I went to grab him, and he said, we're in the heat. The light bulb came on. Bing.
We're in the heat.
We're in the heat. That was the heat spot. Forget what we had called. Forget what we had laid out. Why do something else? The crowd already reacted.
Because of the crowd's reaction.
The crowd reacted in that moment.
Okay.
Now we're in the heat. It was like, oh.
So based on you guys' outline?
So we had a heat spot worked out. But the way he took that boot and the way the crowd reacted to it, there was no need to call a heat spot.
Was he hurt?
No, he wasn't hurt.
So did your boot actually even?
Absolutely. He ate that boot, but he just ate it with he was reckless with his body, but never with yours.
Understood.
Which is why he had the brain of a 70-year-old guy, that CTE, but he wasn't hurt at all. But because of the crowd thought he was hurt. And at that point, boom, we're in the heat. And I remember the light bulb came on that day, because there have been other times in matches where we had a heat spot called, but something happened earlier on that got such a reaction. No, we're in the heat. We're in the heat now. And, that happens oftentimes when you're working. There might be something that you called, but something else works out just the way it does. And then you just listen to the crowd. And that's something that, again, I guess it's generational, but a lot of the OGs used to say, listen to the crowd. Listen to the crowd. I remember one time working with Chuck Palumbo. We were in Baltimore. And I forgot what he did, but he hit me with, and Chuck Palumbo was a huge guy. You don't understand how big Chuck Palumbo actually was in person. Huge guy. And he hit me with some kind of move I forgot. And he hooked it tight like it was a finish. And this was around the time Chuck Palumbo was getting a little bit of a push. And he hooked it for the finish. And I kicked out. And you heard a huge pop from the crowd. And Chuck leaned in and he goes, "We got these motherfuckers, we got them." And that's what you want. You want that reaction from the crowd to let you know, okay, this is what we're doing, here's where we're going. So to summarize, a lot of the lesser experienced talent want to lay everything out from A to Z. And I think that comes with security, knowing what's coming next. But as you get more experience and as you get more acquainted with your craft and working on live television, live pay-per-views, you learn that you have to be fluid. And if you got a whole bunch of stuff laid out, it sometimes takes away from being in the moment. Because sometimes a rope breaks. Especially when you're on, lower indie shows and whatnot, the rope breaks. The match is still going, or sometimes you might get hurt. But if you're not injured to the point that you can't go on, you're like, oh man, I tweaked my knee. Hey man, take it easy. I hurt my knee. I've done that before where my knee was hurt, but I finished the match. But I'm just working like, okay, now, hey, my knee's banged up. But we make that part of the story. So earlier, lesser experienced men and women in wrestling will want to lay everything out step by step. But with experience, you get more and more away from that, because the art of storytelling is often combined with listening to the audience, knowing your audience, and improv. That's why when people say, oh, that stuff you do is choreographed. Nothing I do is choreographed. It's predetermined. We know who's going to win and lose. But a lot of the stuff we do out there, like I said, well, I'll have an outline. We'll talk about some of the stuff. But a lot of that, the way I like to do it, is in real time, working on the fly.
So what goes into cutting a great promo, and how much freedom does a wrestler have versus reading a script?
Dwayne Swayze, you ask excellent question. Shout out to the almighty Iron Sheik. And that's actually, since I brought up Iron Sheik, every now and again I go down the YouTube rabbit hole and I watch Iron Sheik promos. And they were the most incoherent,
He loves the MVP.
Oh, yeah. Me and Shiki Baby were close, but he never said MVP. I was PVM. He could never get MVP. But I was Gimmick Man. Gimmick Man. I'll have to tell that story one day, how I got that nickname. But his promos were always awesome, even though they were disjointed and discombobulated, just because of his conviction and the way he would deliver it. I offer you Exhibit A. To me, the worst promo content, but one of the most captivating promos, Ultimate Warrior. Nobody knew what the fuck he was talking about, and the gods of the thunder and the rain and the starship and like nobody knew what he was talking. He didn't know what he was talking about. He was probably coked out of his mind, But the conviction and the passion and the intensity.
What he was saying.
And because he believed it, you believed it too, Some of my all-time favorite promos came from the Macho Man.
Right. You gotta hit us with it.
No, I wish I had a good Macho Man, but just he would, the cream always rises to the top. Yeah, and he had the little creamer that he brought from catering. That he brought it out. You know, one of my favorites was when he won the Intercontinental title, and it was talking about the champion's prerogative to change his mind. And he's holding the Intercontinental title. And he says, Elizabeth, hold my championship title. And she reaches out and he goes, nope, I changed my mind. Like, I implore you to go to YouTube and just for 20, 30 minutes, just go watch Macho Man promos. He's one of my all-time favorite promos. But I think what makes a promo great is conviction, the delivery of it. Because as I said, you can have, and you've had throughout the years, guys who just went talking absolute gibberish, but it sounded good. Yeah. I don't know what he's talking about, but man, I remember the first time I ever saw Chono, one of my all-time favorites, Chono Masahiro. He was cutting a promo in Japanese, and there was just a little bit of English in there. And I don't know what he was talking about, but the way, and I don't speak fluent Japanese, but just, I remember he was like, he was saying, just with that gruff, gravelly voice, and he was like, NWA, are you fucked up now, Muto? What you do now, Muto? And he was just speaking Japanese. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I was invested. Yo, I'm watching. At that point, I did not, but I understood. I'm fucked up now. Right. Yeah, and everything that came behind that was like, well, he's telling Muto about his ass, But I learned how to cut promos from growing up in the neighborhood, because we cut promos all the time on each other. And in my neighborhood, I don't know how it was growing up on Fondren, but...
Yeah, baby. Fondren was there for Houston all day. What up?
But, dude, if you couldn't, back in the day, they used to say, playing the dozens or whatever. Man, if you couldn't defend yourself, don't come out the house, because that's how you knew you were down. If you came out of the house and came around the boys and they started ranking on you or talking about your haircut or your shoes or whatever, and you, man, what about you? Then you knew you were down. If you came and started hanging out around the boys and nobody was messing with you, you weren't all right. You weren't cool, But you had to learn how to defend yourself and speak up and cut promos and crack. So that just became on the back of the bus, ranking. We'd be ranking, man, Dwayne mama so nasty, I called this house, she answered the phone, I caught an ear infection, dog,
Instant fight.
You're gonna talk about my mama. But for me, I think one of the coolest things about being a heel is my boos are cheers.
Right.
If I'm doing my job right, you're booing me. And I love it. I revel in those boos. And I've always felt that a promo from a heel who tells just a little bit of the truth is one of those things that it makes you mad. And one of the other things is, as a heel, I would lie incessantly. But you can't tell me. I'm a heel. I'd have people come up to me and go, oh, MVP, yeah, I saw when you lost to Matt Hardy. I never lost to Matt Hardy. But, man, I saw you. Matt Hardy never beat me, never. I beat him every time. But I had grown men one time. But I saw you. Man, you lying. You ain't never seen me lose to Matt Hardy. I'm undefeated in my career. I never lost. That just drives people crazy. But to your point, my favorite promo guys throughout history, naturally, Paul Heyman. I'm a Paul Heyman guy. I learned so much from him. Of course, Stone Cold, The Rock. These guys can stand out there in the ring and captivate you for 20, 30 minutes and keep you, Edge was another one of my favorite guys. I don't think he gets brought up enough in the promo conversation, especially when he was doing the stuff with Vicky, like the emotional content of that. Remember that, So if you're...
But it's a small list, Pete, of those wrestlers, you included, that can make that happen in the ring, through actually wrestling and as well as on the mic, man.
Well, when a promoter entrusts you with the mic and that television time. That's a huge responsibility. And that promoter is saying, I trust you to take this microphone, step out there in my ring on live television where there's, I think, a 2 or 3 second delay, and tell the story. And I'm going to trust that you're not going to drop any F-bombs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to trust that you're going to get this situation. I'm going to trust you in the driver's seat of this segment. And how you perform in that moment dictates whether or not you ever get the mic again. And in my case, I've always had the gift for gab. And what got me hired was my promo ability. We'll go into this more in another episode, but I pitched the MVP character. I put together a whole package that I sent to talent relations to get my character hired. But I included with that a DVD. And on that DVD, there was a 1-minute promo and a 4.5-minute promo. And I included the 1-minute promo to show that I can cut a short promo and hit a time. And I included the 4.5-minute promo to show that I could fill time, yet still be entertaining and captivating.
Was this just on your own? Did you innately know to do that, or did you have someone kind of guiding you?
I think it was a little bit of both, just from my experience from being around guys, watching the programming and then kind of figuring things out. But when I sent the package in, every week they would have DVDs that they would watch in the creative room for Vince to look at developmental talent to see, who got his attention and who didn't. And Court Bauer from MLW, he told me that he and Dusty said, hey, Vince, we want you guys to take a look at this guy. And they showed Vince my promo from that package that I sent to get hired where I pitched the MVP character. And Court told me that Vince watched it, said, we got to get this guy on TV. And
that is amazing.
And Court said that they said, well, Vince, he's not signed yet. And Vince allegedly said, why the hell not? And that's what got me signed. That's what got it. He watched the promo and said, I want this guy on my TV. The whole idea of cutting a promo is to sell tickets. You want people to get invested in that promo to watch what it is you're talking about. And historically, we used to say about Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, they would talk them into the building. Because when they would talk about this big match that's coming up, you want to see it, And, Dusty Rhodes just, arguably the greatest talker of all time. Ric Flair's in that stratosphere, stratosphere, Dusty Rhodes. I say the stratosphere for me and you, baby, You want to strike an emotional chord with the viewer. Now, if you're a heel, you do that by making them angry. If you're a babyface, you do that by rallying their emotion to get behind you. But the whole idea is to strike an emotional chord with the viewer to make them invest in what you're saying. And when they invest in what you're saying, hopefully that investment goes to their pocketbook to buy the pay-per-view or buy tickets to the big match as it used to be.
How much freedom do you have? Like when you get the mic, are they telling you, P, you need to say, here's a full script, or is it just a bullet points?
All right. That depends on where you work. When I was at WWE, a lot of those promos were completely scripted. And, a lot of the talent had to memorize the promo word for word. But then...
Even you?
No.
Okay.
That's why I said a lot.
Okay, on a 10-4. I was like, there's no way.
No, I'm not memorizing a 3-page promo. I'm not doing that, But there are certain people who earned the privilege of the writers would hand a script over and say, okay, here's what we're looking for. And they would tell me, like, MVP it up. Or like the Usos, or Uso that up, because, this college-educated Midwestern white guy can't write in my voice, But you just write the overview and then I'll look it over, get the general beats of it, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to say something that I'm going to try to strike a chord within you to hate my guts and want to see this baby face beat my ass. Or, depending on the situation, I'm going to go and try to strike an emotional chord to get you to respond in a way to watch what we're promoting. So how much say you have in it depends on where you work and your trust level with the boss. AEW, they don't script out the promos for people. They'll give you a general idea of what they want you to do, and you're free to go do whatever you want. So a lot of those promos
matter, talent level, experience.
None whatsoever. You go out there, you cut a promo, get yourself over, get your situation over, get the group over, get the match, or whatever the case may be. AEW is way freer with that. I mean, they have writers that can work with you and give you a general idea for the promo. WWE is way more hands-on and produced in terms of who can say what. Now, once you get to a certain level of trust, then they'll just say, here's the general idea, go out there. And I can say, fortunately for me, in my career, I've only ever got the Vince McMahon finger wag, twice.
Twice?
The first time was because I listened to a writer who told me how to deliver a promo. And when I came back, Vince McMahon just went, God damn it, MVP, why would you do that? And I was new, but I wasn't so new that I didn't snitch on the writer.
Right on.
I didn't say, well, this writer told me to say it that way. I just went, okay, I learned, now I know. And the only other time that happened, interestingly enough, was when I was cutting a promo for Bobby, and they wanted me to mention Tyson Fury.
Okay.
But I took the liberty of subbing Francis Ngannou for Tyson Fury. And when I came back, Vince and Bruce were at Gorilla, and they called me over, and Bruce made it very clear that they wanted me to mention Tyson Fury because Tyson Fury had done business with WWE, and, he was the world heavyweight champion. But I'm an MMA. I mean, I love boxing too, but I'm a big MMA fan. And I wanted to, and Bobby was an MMA fighter. So I wanted to try to make it something a little more updated, in terms of what's hot and what's cool. And Vince looks at me and goes, nobody knows who this Francis guy is anyway,
Wrong.
Vince didn't know. I knew. Right. And that was the only other time. Every other time I ever cut a promo, I was always fortunate to get the thumbs up from Vince, or, you got three things from Vince. You either got the headset came off and the come here, and you knew that wasn't good. You got no response at all, which meant you did your job. Good job. I don't have to talk to you. You don't have to come over and get his approval. Or three, if it was really good, he'd take the headset off, and he didn't do this. He'd wave you over and give you a hug. God damn it, that was great, pal, So what goes into a great promo is passion, conviction, and presentation. You have to be passionate about what you're saying. The delivery has to be palatable for the audience, and the presentation has to be such. If you're a baby face, you got to have that baby face fire that they're talking about. If you're a heel, you have to have a certain level of arrogance or dislikability. Look at Miz. Miz is another one, a great one. Like, you just Miz, you just want to punch him in his face, But he's exceptional at doing that. And I think part of what makes my promo so good is that I don't memorize anything. And I would tell a lot of young guys, if you memorize a promo and you forget a line, then you're lost. And you're going to start fumbling because you're trying to think, where did I go? But if you didn't memorize anything, then you can just free flow and go where you want to go. You got the beats in your head. Once before Monday Night Raw, when at this point it was just me and Bobby Lashley. They had broken up the Hurt Business, and Bobby was shooting a cold open with Lashley's ladies, and it was just me. 10 minutes to 8, the writer walks up and gives me 3 pages of dialogue between me and Bobby and goes, okay, everything's been rewritten. This is your promo now. 10 minutes to 8. 10 minutes to 8, 3 pages. 5 minutes to 8, Bobby walks in. And the writer goes over to Bobby and says, "Hey, Bobby, the whole promo's been rewritten." And Bobby goes, "Man, give that shit to Pete.
I want to do it.
He said, no, you don't walk up to me 5 minutes before we go out and hand me 3 pages." And at that point, like, there was some major revisions. And so I just read through it what I could. And I got the thing. I said, "All right, Bobby, since we're not interacting, there's not verbiage." I said, "When I say this part," because there was some about in Bobby's little finger, how much power he had. "When I say this part, just hold up your little finger. And when I say this part, just nod." And, I said, and we'll get through it. I tore that shit up, threw it away. And I remember Rome came to me afterwards and he goes, "Pete, that promo that you did last night was a little different than usual." I said, "Yeah, because I was literally out there just off the top of my head trying to kill these 7, 8, 9 men, whatever it was. It was the opening segment of Raw,
So, with the Lashley's ladies, do they get instruction from the writers?
No, because they don't have anything to say.
They just...
they just what, and that's something else that's important. Like, we're doing walkthroughs for blocking. Like, when you have extras that don't have television experience, or at least wrestling television experience, you have to do walkthroughs to let them know, you stand here, you stand there, don't do too much of this, don't do too little. You just got to kind of let them know, because just they're dressing on the plate, so to speak. The meat and potatoes are me and Bobby, so they're not saying anything, so you don't have to worry about that. And if you do have an extra that has a speaking part, then you have to coach them and let them know, say it this way. It's just an experience thing.
And since you bring up extras, I got to ask you real quick, and I know we'll probably talk about this in greater detail in another episode, but you have done the security role, right? So do they kind of go through this, or did you guys go through the same thing with knowing exactly what to do? And
everything on WWE television has a rehearsal and a walkthrough for blocking. AEW is a bit different. Everything doesn't always have a rehearsal and a walkthrough. They're a little bit more free-spirited with how they do that. I, however, anytime I have something, I will get everybody together beforehand and say, "Let's walk through this. Let's get blocking down." It's just because that's the way I was taught, and that's the way I like it done. But at the end of the day, when you cut a promo, you should be striking an emotional chord with the viewer that will make that person want to tune in to see you win or see you lose. And that's the goal of a promo, to strike an emotional chord with the viewer to get a very specific response. And if you're not doing that, then you're not doing your job. How was that for an answer?
Sensation.
So if they've made it to this point in the video,
Yep. Like,
comment,
subscribe,
and make sure that you hit the little bell thing so you get the notification.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be dropping this on you every week. Every week?
Every week.
Every week. It's a weekly episode.
Yeah.
So here's a toast. See you next week.
I just lay back in something new. Whiskey 21 and over, low ball. Make it too neat. Dizzer from Harlem. Yeah, I'm from Houston, off of Fondren. Mike Mazan and real world flow. Plant these seeds in the streets and in weeks watch it blossom. Dark night, riding on chrome, swinging through Gotham. It's me and Pete, repaving these roads. I feel like Cody. Shot a fiend the 8th, I heard his yell Kobe. I reserve the right, you get what you deserve. Enjoy this full circle moment as the turntables turn. Sharing pies call ace every time we serve. You fight or flight, bout the spike, hands off, still touching nerves. Y'all got the gall, I'm running this route without the ball. P called the play, now we trending like Logan Paul. The we got in store can't be purchased in the mall. 50 and 0 like Floyd.